The sound of laughter echoed from the dining room. I stood at the kitchen doorway holding a steaming tray of lasagna, wearing the same navy blue dress I had worn to my daughter's graduation years ago. It wasn't new, but it was clean and neat, and it meant something to me. As I stepped forward, I caught the tail end of a whisper. Chloe, my daughter, leaned toward her friend Megan and said with a smirk, "God, Mom's still wearing that dress. I swear it's older than me." The other girls chuckled, loud enough for me to hear. I paused just for a second, steadying the tray in my hands. I looked at Chloe, my only child, my pride, my heartbreak, and smiled gently. Then I walked in and served dinner, like nothing had happened. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before everything changed, my life felt simple, but full. I lived in a small 2-bedroom home on the edge of town, the kind with creaky floors and wallpaper that had faded in the sunlight over the years. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every morning, I'd sit by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee and watch the sun rise over the oak tree in the yard. Birds would gather on the fence. I always thought of them as visitors, there to remind me that quiet didn't mean lonely. Raising Chloe on my own wasn't easy. My husband, Warren, passed when she was only 6, a heart attack in his sleep. One day, we were a family of 3, and the next, I was navigating life alone with a first grader who didn't yet understand what forever meant. I held it together because I had to. There was no one else to lean on, and Chloe needed me to be strong. I worked full-time as a public school teacher and tutored in the evenings to make ends meet. Every paycheck was stretched tight, but I always made sure she had what she needed. Chloe never went to school without a packed lunch or clean clothes. I remember sewing her Halloween costumes late into the night and staying up helping her with science projects. I kept her drawings on the fridge for years. Our house was filled with books, hand-me-down furniture, and the sound of our shared laughter. I taught her to ride a bike, to bake banana bread, to speak with kindness. I showed up at every parent-teacher meeting, every recital, every spelling bee. I was always there. She was a bright girl, smart and driven, and I was proud of her. When she got accepted into a top university, I cried alone in the bathroom because I didn't know how I'd afford it. But we figured it out. Scholarships, savings, and late-night shifts tutoring kids whose parents were too busy to help them. I remember driving her to campus the day she moved in. She was so excited. She told me not to get out of the car, said she could carry everything herself. I sat there for a few minutes after she disappeared into the building, watching other parents hug their children goodbye. That was the first time I felt it, that tiny flicker of distance. But I brushed it off. Once Chloe graduated, she landed a job in marketing and started making more than I ever had as a teacher. I cheered her on every step of the way. When she got her first promotion, I baked her a cake and mailed a handwritten card. She thanked me with a quick text. I told myself she was just busy. She moved into a sleek apartment downtown, all glass and chrome and minimalist furniture. She began surrounding herself with people I didn't know, friends who dressed in designer clothes and took weekend trips to wine country. Her voice changed when she spoke to them smoother, quicker, full of industry buzzwords I didn't understand. When I visited, she'd offer me oat milk lattes and gently nudge me toward topics I couldn't contribute to. Still, I held on to what we had. I kept cooking for her when she let me visit, wearing the same old dress she used to compliment when she was younger. She once called it elegant in an old-school way. I remembered that every time I slipped it on. There was a kind of quiet pride I carried in the life I'd built. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I knew the names of every student I'd taught over the years. I had letters from parents and kids thanking me for helping them believe in themselves. I still volunteered at the community center on weekends, still picked up groceries for my elderly neighbor. My life had slowed down, but it still held meaning. What I didn't realize, or maybe refused to see, was how far Chloe had drifted. She'd begun to curate a version of herself that didn't include where she came from. I had become part of the past she no longer wanted to display, but I loved her, fiercely. And sometimes, love makes you blind. I kept showing up, kept being the mother I'd always been, believing that deep down she still saw me. Until that dinner party, until the moment she laughed not with me, but at me. It happened about 6 months before that dinner party, though I didn't realize how deeply it mattered at the time. Chloe had just landed a new position at a rising marketing firm downtown. She called me with excitement in her voice, saying they were hosting a company mixer at a rooftop bar to celebrate the launch of a major campaign. She said it was a big deal, lots of partners, potential clients, and executives would be there. I congratulated her with genuine pride in my heart. Then I asked the most natural question a mother could ask. Would you like me to come and support you? There was a long pause. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, watching a pot of soup bubble on the stove. Chloe cleared her throat and said, I don't think it's really your kind of crowd, Mom. It's very modern, kind of high level. You'd probably feel out of place. I laughed softly and said, Sweetheart, I've taught middle school for 30 years. I've been outnumbered, out-talked, and outdone every day of my life. I think I can handle a cocktail party. She chuckled, but it was uneasy. It's just, it's more networking than celebration. It's not personal. That word landed strangely in my chest. Not personal. I told her I understood, wished her a great evening, and hung up without pressing her. But afterward, I sat in my living room, still holding the phone in my hand. A part of me tried to make sense of her tone, the gentle way she had excluded me, as if she were offering protection rather than rejection. But another part, the quieter, older, wiser part of me, knew something was changing. I just couldn't bring myself to name it yet. I tried to move past it. After all, Chloe was navigating a fast-paced world I'd never known. Maybe she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. Maybe she was just trying to manage appearances. It wouldn't be the first time someone in a polished space preferred to keep their roots hidden. Still, over the next few weeks, I noticed how Chloe's calls grew shorter. She didn't ask about my volunteer work anymore, or whether I'd seen the students I used to mentor. She'd jump straight into stories about meetings, branding trends, or new contacts she'd made. I would listen, proud but quiet, waiting for the moment she might ask how I was, but that moment rarely came. One day, I sent her a picture of a handmade quilt I had finished for the church fundraiser. It had taken me weeks to complete deep blues and burnt orange patches, some of them made from Chloe's old baby clothes I had kept for years. She replied, "That's cute," and nothing more. I felt silly for expecting more, for thinking she might see the memories stitched into each square. Another small moment happened at a boutique downtown. Chloe had invited me out to shop with her one Saturday, which surprised me and lifted my spirits. As we walked into the sleek store filled with expensive handbags and silk blouses, I could feel her energy change. I reached for a simple sweater I thought looked nice, and she leaned in and whispered, "Mom, that's really outdated. Try this instead." She handed me a beige wrap I couldn't even figure out how to wear. The saleswoman smiled politely, and I laughed to cover my confusion. Later that day, Chloe posted a photo on social media, her and I at the cafe, cropped so that only her outfit was visible. The caption read, "Showing Mom the modern world." I reread it 3 times. My smile in that picture felt different now. These weren't explosive moments, they weren't cruel, but they chipped away at something inside me. The warmth between us had begun to cool, almost unnoticeably. She wasn't pushing me away with anger. She was doing it with gentle edits, soft silences, polite omissions. At the time, I convinced myself it was just part of her growing up. I didn't see it as a red flag, but I should have. It wasn't one big moment. That's the thing about emotional erosion, it comes quietly, softly, like water wearing down stone. You don't notice it until the surface is smooth and hollow where strength used to be. After the boutique incident and the company mixer, I started to feel a subtle shift in how Chloe related to me. It was in her eyes, in the slight delay before she answered my calls, in the way she'd glance at her phone mid-conversation. I kept showing up for her. I brought homemade soup when she was sick. I hemmed a skirt for her before a big meeting. I even helped her assemble furniture for her new apartment when the delivery men left everything in boxes. She said thank you sometimes, but her words were quick and weightless, like she was checking a task off a list rather than speaking from her heart. One weekend, I invited her over for dinner, her favorite lemon chicken and roasted potatoes. I cleaned the house top to bottom and lit candles in the dining room, the same way I used to on special occasions when she was a child. She showed up 40 minutes late, walked in on a phone call, and mouthed sorry as she waved me off. She didn't hang up until halfway through the meal. I watched her scroll through her messages while I talked about a student I ran into at the grocery store. He had been a struggling boy in my class years ago and told me I was the reason he finished school. I was proud of that moment. It mattered to me. But Chloe barely looked up. She nodded absently and said, "That's nice, Mom," before launching into a story about a viral marketing trend and how she was thinking of starting a podcast. I felt myself retreat a little then, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't even realize she didn't care. That was harder to face. At one point, I mentioned that I might volunteer more at the community center since retirement had left me with long, empty days. She smiled and said, "You should get a hobby, Mom. Something fun. Maybe take a class like, I don't know, pottery or something." It wasn't mean, but it stung. Teaching, helping, serving those things were my joy. They were my legacy. To her, they sounded like placeholders. Boring, unimpressive, outdated. Then came the photos. Chloe's social media became a curated gallery of her life: rooftop brunches, wine tastings, charity galas. Her captions were clever, her outfits stunning, her friends polished. There was no trace of where she came from, no mention of me, no Mother's Day post, no throwbacks from childhood. One time, a friend of mine from church commented on one of Chloe's posts, saying, "Your mom must be so proud of the woman you've become." Chloe liked the comment but didn't respond. She never tagged me in anything. I tried not to let it bother me. I reminded myself she was busy, that this was what independence looked like. But I could feel it, the slow dissolving of our connection, like we were standing on opposite banks of a river that had grown wider over time. Even her compliments felt strained. Once, I wore a brooch she had given me years ago. She looked at it and said, "You're still wearing that?" Her tone wasn't cruel. It was surprised, maybe even amused. I smiled and said, "Of course. You gave it to me." She shrugged and turned away. I started noticing how carefully she edited me in public. If we bumped into someone she knew, she introduced me as Elaine, never my mom. If I talked too long, she'd gently touch my elbow, her signal to wrap it up. If I offered an opinion, she'd respond with, "That's one way to look at it," before redirecting the conversation. Every little moment was another drop of water on the stone. It wasn't rejection with fangs. It was something more elegant, more painful invisibility. I wasn't the villain in her story. I just wasn't in the story anymore. And yet, I kept loving her. I kept trying to show up, to stay relevant, to remind her that behind all the things she was becoming stood the woman who had given everything for her to get there. But I could feel it. I was disappearing, and she didn't even notice. The night that finally broke something inside me didn't start any differently than the others. Chloe had invited a few of her close friends over for a small dinner at her apartment. She called it girls' night with a classy touch. She wanted me to help prepare the meal, said it would be fun, just like old times. At first, I was happy she'd asked. I'd spent that entire morning marinating chicken, prepping vegetables, and rolling out dough for her favorite apple tart. Cooking had always been my love language, and I figured maybe this was her way of reconnecting. Before heading over, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, holding the dress I'd worn to Chloe's college graduation. It was a dark navy blue number with a modest neckline and soft lace sleeves. Not trendy, not loud, but it made me feel like myself, calm, composed, and graceful. Chloe used to say I looked elegant in it. That day, I wore it proudly. When I arrived, Chloe greeted me at the door in heels and a sleek black jumpsuit. Her friends, Megan and Tara, were already sipping wine on the couch, dressed in sharp blazers and designer accessories. They looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. "Dinner smells amazing," Tara said, glancing toward the kitchen. I smiled. "Thank you. It's Chloe's favorite. I hope you're hungry." I went into the kitchen and started setting the table. Chloe followed behind me, bringing the wine glasses. "Mom," she whispered quickly, "next time, maybe just wear something more modern. This group is kind of particular, you know?" Her words stung more than they should have. I said nothing, just nodded and kept placing silverware. Dinner began with light conversation. I served the plates, refilled the water glasses, and even offered to pour the wine. Megan complimented the food, and I thanked her, telling a little story about the first time I made the same meal for Chloe when she was 10. "Oh, Chloe, I had no idea you came from such a domestic goddess," Megan joked. "She is old school," Chloe added, sipping her wine. Then she leaned back in her chair, looked me up and down with a smirk, and said, "I mean, look at that dress. It's literally older than I am. She's been wearing it forever." They all laughed. It wasn't loud or cruel, just casual and comfortable, the kind of laughter people share when they assume the subject won't mind, or that she doesn't matter enough to mind. I stood there holding a serving spoon, frozen in that moment. My mouth wanted to move, but my heart got there first. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat and smiled gently, like I always did. "It's a classic," I said softly. "Some things don't go out of style." But I could feel the heat in my face, the way my ears burned. My hands trembled slightly as I returned to the kitchen. I finished plating the tart, slicing it with care so none of them would see how my fingers had begun to shake. Chloe didn't look at me again that evening. She sat with her friends talking about conferences, travel plans, new hair salons. I cleaned quietly, stacking dishes and wiping the counter while they laughed in the other room. I didn't speak unless someone asked a direct question. I kept my smile in place, not because I wasn't hurt, I was, but because I didn't want them to see it. I didn't want Chloe to see it. I waited until dessert was served and plates were cleared. Then I gathered my coat and purse, thanked everyone for coming, and told Chloe I was heading out. She gave me a quick hug at the door and said, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." I smiled again, but something inside me had gone quiet. On the walk home, the streets were empty and the air was sharp with the first chill of fall. I clutched my coat tighter around me and thought about that laugh. The way Chloe had looked at me, like I was some well-meaning relic from a world she had outgrown. I didn't cry, not yet. But for the first time, I didn't want to wear that dress again, not because it was old, but because of how she made me feel in it. The next morning, I woke up early as I always did and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in my hands. The house was quiet. It usually brought me peace. But that morning, the silence felt different. Heavy. I kept thinking about the night before the laughter, the quick glances, Chloe's voice echoing in my head as she said, "She's been wearing that forever." I looked down at my hands. They were steady now, but I remembered how they trembled when I was slicing dessert. I remembered the taste of shame I hadn't asked for, the way I'd smiled through it, because what else could I do? That dress was draped over a chair across from me, still neatly pressed. I hadn't had the heart to hang it back up. I stared at it for a long time. The navy blue looked dull in the morning light. Something about it felt different, like it belonged to a person I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. I didn't talk to Chloe that day. She didn't call, and I didn't expect her to. She had no idea anything was wrong. That was the part that hurt the most. To her, it had just been a fun night with friends and a harmless joke about her mother's outdated fashion sense. To me, it was a turning point. I wasn't angry, not exactly. There was no rage, no bitter monologue in my mind, just a quiet ache that settled into my chest and refused to leave. A few days passed and Chloe sent a message. "Thanks again for helping with dinner. The girls loved it. Let's plan something again soon." I stared at her words, so casual, so unaware. I typed out a response, then deleted it. What could I say that would make her understand without sounding like I was asking for pity? Instead, I sent a simple reply. "Glad you enjoyed it. Take care of yourself." And that was it. I didn't reach out again. I stopped offering to help with errands or bring her groceries. I didn't ask how work was going or offer to drop off her dry cleaning on my way to town. I didn't ask to visit. I began pulling back from her world in quiet ways, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. I had given so much of myself for so long that I hadn't noticed how little of me was left. I was still showing up, still giving, still waiting to be seen, and it was making me invisible. That week, I went through old boxes in the attic. There were photos of Chloe in every stage of her childhood missing teeth, Halloween costumes, birthday cakes. There were hand-drawn cards she'd made for me in crayon that said, "Best Mom Ever." I held one up to my chest and sat down on the floor beside the boxes. I whispered to the room, "Where did that little girl go?" I wasn't mourning the loss of a dress or a dinner. I was mourning the version of us that used to feel unbreakable. I started making space in my home, not for anyone else, but for me. I cleared out a cabinet full of old teaching supplies. I boxed up the clothes that no longer brought me joy. I moved my reading chair closer to the window, where the light poured in. It was a small thing, but it felt like claiming a corner of myself again. On Sunday, I didn't go to Chloe's like I usually did. I went to the park instead. I watched families playing, couples walking dogs, teenagers skateboarding. I breathed in the cool air and told myself it was okay to need distance. That stepping away didn't mean I loved her any less. It meant I was choosing to love myself, too. Linda, my oldest friend, called that afternoon. I hadn't told her what happened yet, but she heard something in my voice. "You all right?" she asked. "I think so," I said. "I'm just tired of pretending things don't hurt." There was a pause, and then she said, "It's okay to let go of what no longer holds you." That night, I folded the navy blue dress and placed it in a storage bin, not out of shame, but as a way of closing a chapter. It had served me well. It had carried memories, some sweet, some painful. I wasn't walking away in anger, but I wasn't standing still anymore either. There's a kind of quiet that follows you when you realize the person you love no longer sees you, not just ignores you, not just hurts you, but stops seeing you altogether. I felt that silence echo through my home in the days that followed. It lingered in the corners of every room, like dust settling after a storm. I didn't have the words to tell anyone what was wrong. Not really. I hadn't been screamed at. I hadn't been cursed or betrayed in any obvious way. But the ache I carried felt just as sharp. It was the pain of being slowly erased, piece by piece, smile by smile, until you're standing in the same place but wondering whether you're still real. I stopped going into town as often. I skipped church 2 Sundays in a row, which was unlike me. I didn't return calls from friends, not even Linda, who had known me since we were kids. I couldn't find the energy to explain what I didn't fully understand myself. I'd spent my entire life giving, teaching students who barely knew how to spell their own names when they arrived in my classroom, then watching them leave with dreams bigger than their zip code, raising a daughter who had once clung to my leg when she was scared, now laughing at me across a dinner table like I was some outdated family heirloom she was too embarrassed to display. I was tired, bone-deep tired, and not just from the years of doing too much with too little. I was tired of shrinking, of holding my breath in conversations, of dimming my light to fit into her new world. One morning, I sat by the window in my kitchen, still in my nightgown, nursing a mug of tea that had gone cold long before I remembered to drink it. Outside, the wind stirred the trees in the yard. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds. I stared at the oak tree I'd planted the year Chloe was born. It had grown tall and strong, its branches now brushing against the roof. I remembered planting it with Warren, both of us laughing as we fumbled with the shovel and dirt, thinking we knew everything about raising a child and a tree. Now it stood taller than the house, and Warren was long gone. Chloe had grown too, but somewhere along the way I had forgotten how to grow for myself. I spent that afternoon wandering through the house like a ghost. I passed by photos on the walls, Chloe in pigtails, Chloe at prom, Chloe in her cap and gown with my arms wrapped around her. I used to beam in those pictures, proud of the life I had built for us. Now I avoided looking at them too long. They made my chest ache. I opened my closet and stood there for a while, staring at rows of clothes I hadn't touched in months, dresses I had worn to school plays, church functions, parent-teacher conferences, pieces of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. On the top shelf sat a box labeled retirement. Inside were tokens from my students' cards, notes, small handmade gifts. I pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper from a girl named Sierra. It read, "You made me believe I wasn't stupid. Thank you, Ms. Monroe." I clutched it to my chest and sat on the floor, legs folded beneath me. That's when the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, steady, like rain leaking from a cracked roof. I cried for every piece of myself I had handed over without asking for anything in return. For the years spent pouring love into people who had forgotten where it came from, for the silence that had become my second skin. That night, I didn't make dinner. I didn't wash the dishes in the sink. I didn't check my phone. I sat in the living room with the lights off and watched the day fade through the window. Streetlights flickered on one by one. A car passed now and then. The world kept moving, even though I felt like I had stopped. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It wasn't the kind of moment you see in movies with smashed plates and screaming matches. It was the slow, painful realization that I had built my life around people who no longer made space for me in theirs. That was my rock bottom. Not because I was abandoned, but because I had abandoned myself. A few days after that long, dark night in the living room, I woke up before the sun, restless. The kind of restlessness that lives in your bones that won't let you sleep even when you're exhausted. I wandered the house like I had for days, the air feeling stale, the silence pressing against my chest. I ended up in the guest room, the one I used to keep ready for Chloe whenever she visited. The bed was made, the comforter smooth, untouched for months. I sat down and opened the old cedar chest at the foot of the bed. I hadn't looked inside it in years. Inside were keepsakes, a few of Warren's books, Chloe's baby blanket, my mother's brooch, folded papers, tied bundles of letters from former students. Each one felt like a piece of a life I used to wear proudly, now hidden in storage, as if it no longer mattered. As I sifted through the box, I spotted a thick envelope at the very bottom. It was slightly yellowed with time. The flap sealed tightly, and the handwriting across the front made my breath catch. Open after retirement. It was from Marcus James. I hadn't thought about Marcus in a while. He'd been one of my most difficult and gifted students, a boy with a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind. He came from a rough background. His mother worked double shifts. His father was gone and he barely spoke in class during the first few months, but I saw something in him, a spark. I made it my mission to fan it, even when he resisted. I stayed after school with him. I read his essays carefully, wrote detailed notes in the margins. I bought him his first journal with my own money and told him he had a voice worth hearing. He went on to college, then grad school, became a writer. The last I heard, he'd published a memoir that made the bestseller lists. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, neatly typed, but signed in Marcus's familiar scrawl. My eyes scanned the first few lines, and I felt the burn of tears immediately. Dear Ms. Monroe, I hope you're reading this in a quiet moment, maybe with tea in your hand and the sun coming through the window like it used to in your classroom. I've written about 100 versions of this letter over the years, never quite sure when the right time would be. But when I heard about your retirement, I knew. You saved me. You believed in me before I even understood what that meant. You didn't just teach me grammar or how to write a thesis. You taught me how to believe in my own story. And because of that, I've spent my life writing. There's an event happening next month. It's a televised ceremony for educators who've made a lasting impact across the country. It's called the Hall of Honor. I nominated you, and you were selected. They'll be reaching out. I hope you say yes. Also, I hope you kept that navy blue dress. With all my gratitude, Marcus. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the tears blurred the page. For a long time, I just sat there, letter in hand, heart pounding. Something inside me shifted not all at once, but like the slow lifting of a heavy curtain. After all the silence, after all the shrinking, after all the moments where I felt invisible, erased here was proof that I had mattered, that I had left a mark. Not just on a child's report card, but on a life. And not just any life, a life that had grown, thrived, and remembered me. I clutched the letter to my chest and leaned back against the bed, my body shaking with something between relief and disbelief. He remembered the dress. That silly little detail hit me harder than I could have imagined. Of all the things to mention, he remembered how proud I had felt the day I wore it. I stood up, walked into my room, and opened the closet. There it was, still folded, still soft, still mine. I laid it across the bed and just stared at it. For the first time in weeks, I didn't see it through Chloe's eyes. I didn't see something old or embarrassing or laughable. I saw myself, and I remembered I had not been forgotten. I had not been erased. I had simply stopped looking in the right places. That letter wasn't just a discovery. It was a lifeline. The day after reading Marcus's letter, I woke up before the alarm, not from worry or heaviness like before, but from something different. A quiet sense of urgency stirred in me, like the world had tilted slightly and I needed to catch up. The house still looked the same. The old wallpaper still curled at the corners. The coffee still brewed in the same chipped pot. But something inside me had shifted. It was subtle, but undeniable. For the first time in weeks, I made my bed right after getting up. I opened the curtains and let the morning light spill in. I didn't sit in the dark with lukewarm tea. I didn't scroll through my phone wondering if Chloe had texted. I didn't wait to feel better. I simply started moving. After breakfast, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen, an old habit from my teaching days. I wrote down 3 things: get dress cleaned, call, Linda, answer the Hall of Honor invitation. They were small steps, but they gave me purpose. Not the kind of purpose tied to someone else's needs or expectations, but my own. I pulled the navy blue dress from the closet, unfolded it carefully, and ran my hand across the fabric. I held it up to the light and smiled. It still looked beautiful. Worn in, yes, but so was I. And maybe that was okay. At the dry cleaners, the woman behind the counter complimented the dress. "You don't see this kind of detail anymore," she said, admiring the lace sleeves. "It's been with me through a lot," I replied. She looked up and smiled. "Some clothes are like that. They carry our stories." I nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. When I got home, I found the invitation email Marcus mentioned. It had been sitting in my inbox for days, unopened. I clicked it open and read the details slowly. The event was in 2 weeks, hosted by a national education foundation, and would be aired on public television. They had arranged everything: flight, hotel, even a car service. All I had to do was confirm. And just like that, I said yes. It felt surreal. The woman who had spent weeks hiding from the world was now accepting a national honor. Not because she needed validation, but because she finally remembered who she was. That afternoon, I called Linda. When she answered, her voice was warm and steady, like a familiar song. "Elaine? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "I found a letter from Marcus James." Linda gasped. "The writer? The one who dedicated his book to you?" "The same. He nominated me for an award. I'm flying out next week to receive it." She was silent for a moment. Then I heard the sound of her hands clapping. I knew your work meant something. I knew it. Oh, Elaine, this is beautiful. Her joy was real, and it felt good to let someone celebrate me not for being Chloe's mother or Warren's wife or the dependable neighbor, but just for being Elaine. Over the next few days, I prepared slowly. I didn't rush or panic. I polished my shoes. I ironed the dress. I even got a fresh haircut at the small salon near the grocery store. The stylist, a young woman named Kira, told me I looked refined. I left her a generous tip. It wasn't about trying to impress anyone. It was about coming home to myself, reclaiming the parts I had tucked away to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. I still hadn't told Chloe. Part of me wanted to. Part of me longed for that moment where she'd say, "I'm proud of you." But the stronger part of me, the part that was finally waking up, knew that this wasn't her story to approve. This was mine. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't need anyone else to confirm that it mattered. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, dressed in navy blue, soft lace brushing my wrists, and whispered to myself, "You're still here." And I smiled. Because the woman in the mirror wasn't just back, she was rising. Once I accepted the invitation to the Hall of Honor ceremony, something in me settled. There was no dramatic announcement, no bold declarations or social media posts. I didn't call Chloe. I didn't even tell anyone at church. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about returning to the part of myself I had left behind and doing it quietly, on my terms. I've always believed that true change doesn't come with a bang. It comes with quiet decisions repeated daily, a shift in posture, a change in pace, a choice to show up differently in the same life. So I began to prepare. First, I confirmed the travel details. The foundation had arranged a flight and hotel, just as Marcus promised. They even offered a stipend for a stylist, but I declined. I knew exactly what I was going to wear. I took my navy blue dress home from the cleaners, carefully unwrapped it, and hung it in the hallway so I could see it every time I walked by. The sight of it no longer brought shame. It brought something closer to pride. Next, I made a quiet list of what I needed to do. Pack a small suitcase, pick up a pair of new stockings, polish my black heels, and print a copy of the speech they had asked me to prepare. It had to be under 3 minutes. I drafted it by hand, just like I used to write notes for parent conferences. And I read it out loud to myself each morning, practicing the rhythm until the words felt like a part of me. I didn't rehearse it for an audience. There was no need. I wasn't performing. I was remembering. The only person I shared my plans with was Linda. She offered to drive me to the airport and insisted on helping me pick a lipstick that would stand up to stage lighting. I laughed at her dramatics, but let her come over anyway. We sat at my kitchen table just like we did when our kids were small, talking over tea while she rummaged through her makeup bag. She held up a deep, rose-colored tube. This one says, "I'm graceful, but don't mess with me." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds a little intense for a retired teacher." She smiled. "No, that sounds exactly right." I added it to my bag. Meanwhile, I started pulling away from certain routines. I didn't respond to Chloe's daily texts right away, the ones that came out of habit more than care, quick notes about meetings or errands. I wasn't cold, just still. I no longer felt the urgency to keep up with her life or prove my place in it. She didn't notice at first, or maybe she did, and she wasn't sure what to say. Either way, I stopped filling the silence. I no longer offered to cook dinner, to run errands, to fill in the blanks in her life. I didn't explain or defend myself. I simply chose not to chase a closeness that no longer existed. One evening, she called and said, "You've been quiet lately." I said, "Just taking time for myself." There was a pause, but she didn't ask why. She moved on to telling me about a colleague's wedding in Malibu and the shoes she had ordered for it. I listened, but I didn't rush to offer input. When the call ended, I felt calm. That weekend, I went into my small study and took down the photos from Chloe's childhood wall. Not because I was angry. I was simply making room. I replaced them with a framed quote from one of my students. "You made me feel like I mattered." It was time I felt that way too. I kept my preparations light and steady. I practiced sitting up straighter. I put on the lipstick Linda gave me. I packed the award letter Marcus had sent and tucked it between my journal and a book of poetry. No one knew what I was about to do. There were no flashing lights, no emotional buildup, just me, quietly stepping back into myself, not for show, not for Chloe, not for anyone else's applause. This was the beginning of something sacred, and I didn't need to announce it to make it real. A few days before my flight, I stopped by the grocery store for a few things. It was a small errand, but even that felt different now. I walked down the aisles slowly, not because I was tired, but because I was fully present. I wasn't hurrying to finish my list so I could get home in time to call Chloe or check her social media updates. I wasn't rushing toward anyone else's needs. For once, I was simply moving through my day, my time, my rhythm. At checkout, I ran into Mrs. Dorsey, an old colleague from my teaching days. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Elaine," she said, "you look wonderful. Retirement suits you." I smiled, feeling the compliment land in a place that had long been neglected. "It's taken some getting used to," I admitted. "Well, the school's not the same without you," she added, touching my arm. "They still talk about your poetry unit like it was magic." We talked for a few minutes before parting ways, but the warmth of her words followed me home. It reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten, that I hadn't vanished. I'd simply been standing in the wrong light. Later that evening, Chloe called. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was upbeat but slightly off, like she was trying to mask something under the surface. "Hey, Mom," she began. "I've been meaning to tell you I was promoted to campaign lead." "That's great," I said. "Congratulations." There was a pause. She was expecting more. Maybe a squeal, a barrage of questions, a plan for dinner to celebrate. Instead, I let the quiet settle for a moment before adding, "You've worked hard for it." She cleared her throat. "Thanks. So, what have you been up to lately?" It was such a simple question, a normal question, but something in her voice told me she sensed the shift. I had always filled that silence quickly, eager to stay connected. This time, I paused. "I've been preparing for something," I said. "Oh?" Her voice perked up. "Like what?" "I'm traveling next week, just something meaningful I was invited to be part of." Another pause. "What kind of thing?" "It's a recognition ceremony," I said. "For educators, one of my former students nominated me." She was silent again. I could almost hear her sorting through that information, trying to decide how to respond. I didn't fill the space for her. That's amazing, Mom. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't need to," I said gently. "It's something I wanted to do for myself." The quiet grew thick, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one shrinking to make the moment easier. I heard her exhale. "Well, I'm proud of you." Like she wasn't sure whether she still had the right to say them. I appreciated the effort, but something inside me understood finally that I didn't need those words to feel whole. "Thank you," I replied. "That means a lot." After we hung up, I sat for a while in the living room, just staring at the framed letter from Marcus on the table beside me. My home was still quiet, still modest, but it felt fuller now, filled with something steadier than noise. It felt like mine again. Over the next few days, more little shifts happened. Chloe texted more often, but there was a new tone in her messages. Less instructive, more inquisitive. She asked how I was feeling, what I was packing, whether I needed help getting to the airport. I answered kindly, but without urgency. I no longer felt like I had to keep her close through effort alone. At the church potluck that weekend, Linda pulled me aside and said, "You're glowing, Elaine. What's different?" I smiled. I remembered who I was. The power was changing hands, not through force or confrontation, but through quiet return. By reclaiming my worth, I had unknowingly reshaped the dynamic. I wasn't waiting for Chloe to value me anymore. I had already done it for myself, and in doing so, I had changed the way she saw me. The power didn't come from what I said. It came from what I stopped needing. The morning of the Hall of Honor ceremony arrived with a strange calm. I woke up in the hotel room, surrounded by thick curtains, high ceilings, and the soft hum of a city just starting its day. The air smelled faintly of fresh linen and room service coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, holding the dress in my hands, feeling the weight of what it represented. I had worn this navy blue dress for milestones that only I seemed to remember. Graduation ceremonies, school award nights, parent-teacher dinners, always behind the scenes, always giving, always quiet. But today, I was the one being honored. And I would wear it not because I had to, but because I wanted to. As I got dressed, I thought about Chloe. She still didn't know what was about to happen. We had talked briefly over the last few days, but I had kept the details to myself. I wasn't hiding anything, I just didn't feel the need to explain. For the first time in my life, I didn't need her approval to feel proud of something I had done. The driver picked me up at 10. The ride to the venue was smooth, quiet. I stared out the window and watched the city blur past. I felt no nerves, only a deep, settled confidence. At the auditorium, I was escorted backstage and given a microphone. Tanya Rivera, the host of the ceremony and a nationally recognized speaker, came over to greet me. Her presence was magnetic calm, poised, genuine. "Elaine Monroe," she said with a warm smile. "We're honored to have you today." I smiled back, unsure what to say. "You've made an incredible impact," she added. "We've read all about you." As she walked away, I stood a little taller. The stage manager gave me a 5-minute warning. I breathed deeply, closed my eyes, and said a small prayer, not for strength, but for peace. Then, just moments before I was set to go on, my phone buzzed. A message from Chloe. "Saw a promo for some education awards airing today. Said your name. Is that you?" I stared at the screen, almost laughing at the timing. I didn't respond. Instead, I tucked the phone into my bag and walked toward the stage. As I stepped out into the lights, I heard the sound of applause, loud, generous, and warm. The crowd stood, not because I was famous, but because I had meant something to someone. Dozens of someones, in fact. Photos of my classroom flashed on a screen behind me. Students from over the years shared brief clips, telling stories about the time I stayed after school, believed in them, pushed them, fed them. And finally, a video message from Marcus played. "She was the first person to tell me I mattered," he said, voice steady, full of emotion, "and the first adult to make me believe it." I stood still, hands folded, letting the moment wrap around me like a soft blanket. Tanya approached with the microphone and gestured toward me. "Now, please welcome the woman whose quiet strength changed countless lives, Elaine Monroe." I stepped forward. The lights warmed my face. The navy blue dress swayed gently at my knees. "My name is Elaine Monroe," I began, "and I was a public school teacher for 34 years. I never expected a spotlight. I never asked for one. But I see now sometimes the people working in the quiet corners are the ones who shape the world." As I finished, the room erupted again in applause. Not polite, not rehearsed. It was real. Afterward, I was escorted to a small reception room where Tanya congratulated me again. I was sipping sparkling water when my phone buzzed again. A call this time. Chloe. I stepped outside, away from the noise, and answered. Her voice came through immediately, fast and shaky. "Mom, I just saw the broadcast. I'm still watching it. You're on TV. You never told me." I let a quiet moment pass. I didn't think I needed to. She started, then paused. "You looked beautiful. And the things they said about you, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell me any of that?" "Because I wasn't waiting for anyone to notice," I said gently. "I was just doing the work." There was another pause. Her voice softened. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Truly. I hope you know that." "I do," I said. "Now I do." There was no anger in my voice, no bitterness, just clarity. The stage hadn't changed me. It had reminded me. I'd never needed to be seen by the world. I just needed to see myself again. The ceremony aired nationally that evening. I didn't rush home to watch it. I had already lived it, and that was enough for me. I returned to the hotel room feeling calm and content, the kind of peace that settles deep inside your chest when something long buried finally rises to the surface and breathes again. I removed my dress carefully and laid it across the chair like it was something sacred. In many ways, it was. That dress had carried so many moments, quiet victories, painful memories, forgotten strength, and now a celebration I hadn't even known I needed. Just as I was getting ready for bed, my phone started ringing again. Chloe. This time I answered. She didn't say hello. She said, "Mom, the video of your speech is going viral." I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Marcus posted it. On his author page. People are sharing it everywhere. Teachers, parents, even some celebrities. It has over 500,000 views already. Someone made a, quote, graphic of your line, 'Sometimes the people working in the quiet corners are the ones who shape the world.' It's everywhere." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't that I didn't believe her. It just hadn't occurred to me that my words could matter to so many people outside that auditorium. "You're trending on social media," she added, her voice filled with awe. "People are calling you the heart of the hall." I let out a slow breath. Well, that's unexpected. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me that you were nominated? That you meant that much to your students?" I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. Because for years I didn't think it mattered anymore. I thought my life, the small, quiet one I lived, had gone unnoticed, and in a way I accepted that, until Marcus reminded me otherwise. "I wish I had seen it sooner," she said softly. "All those times I brushed you off, I didn't know what you carried." "I know," I replied. "But I think the real problem wasn't that you didn't see me. It's that I stopped seeing myself." The next morning, I woke up to more messages, texts from former students, colleagues, even strangers. There were invitations to speak at schools, to be interviewed on podcasts, to write an essay for a national journal on education. It was surreal. It was overwhelming. It was just a little funny. I had spent the last few years feeling like I was fading into the background. Now, my quiet life had stepped into the spotlight, not because I chased it, but because I lived it with heart. Later that week, Chloe asked if she could come over for dinner. She said she wanted to talk, face to face. I agreed. She arrived carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite, and a small box. Her makeup was minimal, her clothes more casual than usual. She looked nervous. "I brought something for you," she said, holding out the box. Inside was a photo frame. In it, she had placed a still from the ceremony, a shot of me on stage in the navy blue dress, holding the award with a soft, steady smile. Beneath the photo, she had engraved, "The woman I came from. The woman I forgot. The woman I'm learning to honor." My throat tightened. I didn't speak right away. I didn't need to. She sat at the kitchen table while I served dinner lemon chicken and roasted potatoes, the meal I had made so many times for her as a child. But this time, there was no eye roll, no sigh, no embarrassed glances. She ate quietly, and when she spoke, it was not to correct or dismiss, but to ask, "What was it like being a teacher for that long? Did you always know you were making a difference? Were there times you wanted to quit?" We talked for hours, and not once did I feel like I had to prove myself. The final justice wasn't that the world finally saw me. It was that my daughter did. Not because I told her who I was, but because I stopped waiting for her permission to be that woman. It was never about revenge or grand gestures. It was about remembering the value of a quiet life, well lived, and letting that be enough. And now, it finally was. A week after the ceremony, things began to settle. The messages slowed, the buzz faded, and the world moved on, as it always does. But something in my life had shifted permanently, quietly, but deeply. I was no longer waiting for recognition. I had tasted it, yes, but I didn't need more of it to feel whole. What mattered most was that I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and the quiet pride I had once wrapped myself in like a shawl. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Chloe came over unannounced. She didn't knock with her usual light tap or send a text saying she was 5 minutes away. She just showed up. When I opened the door, she stood there holding 2 paper coffee cups and a small bag of pastries from my favorite cafe, the one she always said was too old-fashioned. "I figured you'd be home," she said softly. "Do you have a minute?" I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around the living room like she was seeing it with new eyes. Her gaze paused on the framed quote from my student, the one that read, "You made me feel like I mattered." I could tell it struck her. We sat at the kitchen table where so many of our conversations had started and ended over the years: birthday planning, college decisions, late-night worries. But this time was different. There was no urgency, no performance. Just 2 women sitting across from each other, one with questions, the other with answers she no longer needed to offer. Chloe slid the coffee across the table. "I watched the ceremony again last night." I nodded. "It was a beautiful event." "I cried," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Not just during your speech, but after. I cried because I didn't know who you were, not really, and I'm your daughter." I didn't respond right away. I wanted her to sit with those words, to feel them. She looked down, her hands wrapped around the coffee cup like it was something to hold her steady. "I've been thinking about all the times I tried to fit you into the version of my life I thought I wanted. I pushed you to dress a certain way, talk a certain way, show up a certain way, and when you didn't, I treated you like you were behind, like you needed to catch up to me." She looked up at me then, eyes full of regret. "But you weren't behind, Mom. I was just too immature to understand that you were already standing exactly where I needed to be." My eyes welled with tears, but I didn't cry. I just listened. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight," she continued, "but I'm here now, and I want to know you not just as my mother, but as Elaine, the woman who changed lives, who stood on that stage in a dress I once laughed at and made the world stop and listen." Her words came from a place that felt genuine, not polished, not performative, just real. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was warm, familiar. Like this moment. "I've always loved you," I said, "even when you couldn't see me. But I don't need you to love me the way you used to. I'm not living for that anymore. I'm okay." She nodded. "I know. And maybe that's what makes me want to come closer. Because you're not chasing me anymore. You're just standing there, steady. And I miss that." I reached across the table and touched her hand. Not to console her, not to draw her in, but to meet her where she was. She smiled through tears. "Can we start again?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "We don't need to start again. We just need to move forward." That afternoon, we sat for hours, no fancy dinner, no carefully planned script. Just coffee, pastries, and the slow stitching together of a bond that had frayed, but never fully torn. For the first time in years, we weren't performing roles. We were just 2 women, side by side, with a shared history and the quiet hope of something better ahead. She left with a hug that felt different. Not needy, not apologetic, just full of truth. I stood in the doorway after she drove off, the wind catching the edge of my dress. And I felt it again, that gentle shift. Not a return to the past, but a peaceful step into what could come next. The house was quiet again. After Chloe left that afternoon, I walked slowly through each room, not in sadness, but in stillness. The kind of stillness that follows a deep exhale when the storm has passed and what remains is soft, unshaken peace. I stopped at the living room window where the golden light of early evening spilled across the floor. The navy blue dress was still hanging on the back of my bedroom door. I hadn't put it away yet. I wasn't sure if I ever would. It no longer felt like just a dress. It felt like a chapter, one that had come full circle. From graduation days and scraped knees to laughter I wasn't meant to hear and applause I never asked for. It had been with me through joy and grief, pride and shame. It had been mocked, and it had been honored. And now it simply existed unchanged while I was not the same. I walked out to the porch and sat in my old wicker chair, the one Warren and I used to drink coffee in before the world woke up. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass and blooming gardenias. I closed my eyes and let the breeze brush against my skin. There were no more questions tugging at me. No more need to explain myself or prove my worth. Not to Chloe, not to the world, not even to the parts of me that had once been desperate to be seen. Because now, I saw myself. I saw the long nights spent grading papers by lamplight, the countless phone calls to parents, the homemade birthday cards slipped onto my desk by shy students who found safety in my classroom, the casseroles brought to grieving families, the tiny acts of care no one ever photographed, no one ever posted about. I saw the sacrifices made quietly without applause, the moments of joy found in laughter, shared with Linda over chipped mugs, the times I said no when I wanted to say yes, and the times I said yes even when I was exhausted. And I realized I had built a life that mattered. Not in headlines or trending videos, but in the hearts of the people I had touched. I didn't need the world to validate that anymore. It had been real all along. Inside, my phone buzzed again, another message, another tag, another, "You're an inspiration." And though I was grateful, I didn't rush to respond. I didn't feel the pull. I'd spent so many years filling spaces in other people's lives, spaces they didn't always value. Now I was learning to fill my own. Later that evening, I pulled a small wooden box from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were handwritten letters from students over the years. I hadn't opened them in a long time. I sifted through them slowly, unfolding each one like a memory. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You made me feel seen. You taught me how to be kind. Every line was a mirror, reflecting the parts of me I had allowed the world and even my own daughter to overlook. I placed one of the letters on my desk, next to a candle and a framed photo of Warren holding baby Chloe. Then I sat down and wrote a new note not to anyone else but to myself. Dear Elaine, you made it. Not because the world applauded, but because you never stopped loving, never stopped giving. And now you've learned how to give to yourself too. That is the real reward. With love, me. I folded it, placed it back in the wooden box, and lit the candle. There was no soundtrack playing, no crowd watching. Just a woman in her 60s, surrounded by the life she had built with both hands and an open heart. The next morning I would go for a walk. Maybe call Linda, maybe bake something, or maybe do nothing at all. And that would be enough. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the floor, I stood up and walked over to the navy blue dress. I ran my hand along the sleeve one last time. Then I smiled and turned off the light. Some stories don't need an audience. Some stories just need to be lived.